Kia ora, good morning. Welcome to the Eye in the Sky Show podcast. So today I would like to talk about the San Pedro Poltergeist, or the Jackie Hernandez story. Now, for those of you that, are into this whole paranormal, ghost haunting conclave of information that's out there now with, the internet and YouTube and stuff like that, you're going to know about this. I do believe that this story is loosely based on the movie called The Entity. I believe that the movie The Entity, my father fed me a diet of horror movies when I was growing up. I absolutely loved horror movies. And I do believe that The Entity is loosely based on the Jackie Hernandez story, using a lot of creativity and artistic license to do it. But anyway, for those of you that don't know, or you need a refresher, Jackie Hernandez was a pregnant mum who left her husband to move into a little home in San Pedro, California in 1988, the 17th of November 1988, I believe. And she was having to work multiple jobs just to keep her head above water. Her son was 2. She was pregnant with a girl. She moved into the home, and shortly after she moved in, she started experiencing paranormal activity, perceived paranormal activity. The first being is that she went to check on her children, and when she walked into the room, she saw a man with a flannel shirt and jeans on sitting beside the bed of one of the children on the lower bunk, and he had a grey face, and he looked at her, and he apparently was angry. Now, I've looked at a plethora of websites that recant this, that retell this story. Some people say that he had red flaming eyes. Some people say that he had sunken angry eyes. Some people say that he looked at her angry. Some people say that his flesh was rotting. Some people say that he was gaunt and a withered old man. So this is why you need to be careful what you choose to believe. Don't just go to one source. You've got to look at multiple sources who retell this story, and then make up your own mind using logic and doubt and reason. And if you can't do that, then just listen to what I'm about to say, because everything I'm about to say, everything I'm about to reveal is going to make perfect sense. So then she started claiming, finding blood dripping from the walls. I've seen those photos. It doesn't look like blood. It looks like rust. And at no point did any of the investigators test to see what this was. It looks like rust. She gets her neighbour in, who said that, at first she thought she was crazy, and then this woman started experiencing things as well in her home. And then Jackie was reporting getting things thrown at her. At one point she claimed that she was held down on the ground and couldn't breathe. She had trouble breathing. Apparently breathing was a big issue. Breathing issues were a big thing in that house, feeling like she was being choked, can't breathe. And this is important to remember what I've just said. Now, it is, as someone who has investigated the paranormal my entire life, because of my dad, because when it came to unsolved mysteries and the paranormal and horror movies and stuff like that, a lot of these movies, like The Blob, being based on, star jelly. The movie The Blob was influenced by people's reported sightings of the star jelly, which I talk about in my Ziggy Adamski podcast. So that was the inspiration for The Blob. And this story was the inspiration for The Entity. And Ed Gein was the inspiration for American Psycho and Texas Chainsaw Massacre, so growing up watching these movies, they fascinated me because there was a lot of things that my father was saying, like, did you know this is based on a true story about yada yada, blah blah blah. So that just absolutely fascinated me, because I swear to God, even as young as 7, 8 years old, he knew what I was going to be growing up, and I really believe that he was putting me in a position to um, set me up for life in my work as an occult scientist, as the quantum menace, because in my comic book she's trained by her military father, and my father was in the military. So, I believe that my father knew the path I was heading down, and he was setting me up for life, for what I was about to become, that which I now present to you. So this always fascinated me, and back then we didn't have the internet, so I had to rely on books and magazines and that, and you always go down one line of thought, but then with the introduction of the internet, having so many more resources made available to me, like with this case, and even the one that I recently did about Bathsheba Sherman, like, so many people tell so many different versions that it's impossible for the average everyday person to make up their mind as to what is truth and what isn't. Now, I am not saying at all that what Jackie experienced was a lie or made up, but understanding the paranormal the way that I do, I concur with Dr. Barry Taff, who investigated this activity with Jackie, that she was the product of her own making. He observed that she came from a history of violent relationships. Her marriage had ended. She was under a lot of stress. She was pregnant with her second child. She was working multiple jobs. She was struggling to make ends meet. And, this is no judgment on her, because that's her past, and she should be allowed to let go of all of that now. And this is no judgment on her whatsoever. But understanding psychology the way that I do, if you look at the footage of her house and you see the state of her house, it is often said that you can tell a person's state of psychological mind by how tidy their house is. And her house it's not dirty, it's just untidy. There's clothes everywhere, there's things piled up on dresser drawers, and it's not a tidy home. But I mean, granted, she was a very busy single mum, so that's no criticism to her, but it does point to the suggestion that she was under a lot of stress, she was under a lot of pressure, and as a result, she manifested her fear into reality, which is what poltergeist activity is. It's what the most common forms of paranormal activity is the manifestation of one's fears or nightmares into reality. As I keep saying over and over again, Rene Descartes says, "I think, therefore I am." It is a famous philosophical quote, and in terms of the paranormal, it is 100% accurate. For someone who is a developer of quantum magnetics, which is manipulating time to manifest reality, I live by that principle and knowledge of understanding that you have to be very careful what you think, because you can send it out. Now, when they investigated her home, there was there's reports of a strong putrid smell, which and people saying they smelt blood, which if you know anything about rust gives off a strong iron smell. Rust can smell like blood. Even coins can smell like blood. So I believe that the leaks that she was seeing that looked like blood was actually rust coming from, because if you look at the footage of her attic, there's a lot of, pipes and metal in that above her kitchen, where the cameraman got hung. And so I believe that she had water coming down and it was rust leaking, which gave the smell of blood. But there was also reports of a strong iodine smell in the attic, and around that area, whenever she saw the quote unquote um, ghost or poltergeist or whatever. Um, there was reports of the smell of blood or the smell of iron. So that piqued my interest, and I decided to dig deep and do some investigation, and what I found was absolutely fascinating. The first thing I wanted to know was what gives off the smell of iodine. And what I discovered is this, is that iodine was reportedly one of the main ingredients for meth, crack, methamphetamines. So I did some research and I discovered that meth was developed by a Japanese chemist in 1893. It was used for narcolepsy, asthma, weight loss, and used in World War II to keep troops awake. Now, this is interesting because remember the breathing issues, and the man was reportedly had a grey face. When you have asthma, because you have trouble getting oxygen into your airwaves when you're having trouble breathing. And I know this because my nephew is a chronic asthmatic. He almost died a couple of times. Your lips go purple, which apparently was reported, and your face can go grey from lack of oxygen because, because of the blood supply, your blood not getting, your red cells not getting enough oxygen, so you turn grey and your lips go purple. So I believe that this man that she was seeing, this old man, he wasn't a poltergeist, he wasn't bad, he wasn't negative, he was an asthmatic, possibly died of as a result of the asthma. And the reason why I say this is that it started being used, methamphetamine started being used in the United States in 1932 for asthma. It was put in an inhaler called benzedrine, yeah. And you could get it without a prescription, and then it became used for narcolepsy in pill form. In the 1950s, it became the drug of choice for beatniks, called bennies. It was a popular recreational drug for people like the author Jack Kerouac and poet W.H. Auden. The beatniks were popular all over the world, but especially in San Francisco, California. It was the mecca for the most popular venues for the beatnik generation. San Pedro is 403 miles away from San Francisco. So what I'm suggesting, like it started when the FDA started putting tight restrictions on the use of methamphetamines or meth because of the fact that people were starting to become addicted to it. That's when they started turning to having their own meth labs, which didn't become popular until the 1990s. Because my first thought was, oh, maybe they had maybe someone had a meth lab in that house, and because heat rises, so it's very possible that the chemicals from the making of the meth rose and hovered in the attic. If somebody lived in that house who was cooking their own meth, or taking meth, then the fumes could have risen and stayed in the attic and around that kitchen area. But it said that meth was easy to get right up until the 1990s, sort of late 19, sort of from about 1989, when it became harder to get hold of, but it didn't become popular in the US for cooking and making your own meth with your meth labs and that until the 1990s, and then it took off from there. So that rules out the fact that methamphetamines were used, like they weren't making crack in that house. But if anyone was living in that house who took meth, was taking meth, it is very easy to assume that what they were taking could have, like the fumes of which could have risen, above, because heat rises and so does energy and all that. So, it's very possible that whoever was taking the meth, left residue in the house, which could also easily explain some of the stuff that they saw, leaking from the walls and that. It was never tested, so we don't know what it is. This is just my hypothesis. However, it seems highly unlikely that it was used by a meth addict, and I think it's safe to assume that who they were seeing was probably an asthmatic, and his inhaler, he would have been using his inhaler that had the iodine in it, because the meth was used in the older forms of inhaler. It's very possible that what they were smelling was his inhaler. Now, he's apparently been reported as saying, get out of here, or you must leave now, or get the hell out of here. And they have taken that to mean, he's threatening them, but I think that maybe he was cautioning them, especially if you've got rusty leaks coming from pipes. If you had, it, it sounds like she was around some unsavory people, and she brought that energy into the house. Dr. Taff said that she had a history of being in violent relationships, and had a very disruptive life in that. And it sounds like he was very protective of those children, which is why she saw him around the children. And the interesting thing is, and this is what you need to recognize as well, is that at no point were the children harmed, nor were the children reactionary. However, when I was looking over the footage, I found something very interesting that is a very strong telltale sign that the children were not affected and were actually protected by what was in that house, which is contradictory to all the adults' reports of what they were experiencing. Adults have lifetimes of problems and histories and, that sort of thing. I would love to know, what was going on in the neighbour's life at the time and the history of her life, as to why she was also experiencing these things, because, hysteria can be passed on. Energy is transferable like an STD. And because in the early days I was a teacher's assistant, and I was good at it, to the point where I was offered a free teachers training course. They offered to put me through teachers college for free, the government did, but I turned it down because I was about to get married, and move to Tauranga to be with my first husband. So I turned down the opportunity to become a teacher, but I was actually chosen out of thousands of teachers assistants in New Zealand at the time to partake in a study with children with learning disabilities. And part of that course that I took, because I ended up being given my own small group of children who were diagnosed with everything from ADHD, bipolar disorder, autism, that sort of thing. And I taught them how to read and write, and I loved every minute of it. And one of the things that I was taught to do was to monitor the child's mental well-being by the work that they produced. So any drawings that they did, anything that they built, like, I was able to tell how they were feeling at the time based on what they were drawing. And I'm going to put a link in the description box below, because I actually just did a rundown of my ex-husband, the one who has just been caught hacking my phone. That's a whole different story, but I'll put a link in the description box below. You're not going to believe what I found on my phone. It's been handed over to the West Yorkshire Police, who are dealing with they reopened my case, so they're dealing with it, so they're going to look into it. But anyway, I recently did a critique of his work. I was able to tell a lot about his state of mind, his mental state of mind, and it's actually quite scary how much his artwork has changed since, all of this has happened, since he started doing what he did to me, and that, like, everything has changed in his art style. And while I was examining footage and going through photos of Jackie's house at the time, that she lived in at the time, I found a photo on the wall, and it looks like one of her kids paintings, and it is going to be the cover photo for this podcast. So have a look at it because it's very interesting. And what I found in that painting was it tells a whole story in itself. The writing, as you say, is written on the wall. Now, as an occult scientist, as someone who has investigated the paranormal all my life, you can't investigate the paranormal without understanding psychology and the effects of the Schumann resonance on the human brain and, that sort of thing. And I have always maintained that you will always know whether your house has activity based on how your children and your animals react. And there are no reports of her children being threatened, attacked, scared in any way, shape, or form. And when I saw this painting, I was just blown away. And it gave me a sense of great relief because what this painting actually says, if you look at the inside of the painting or the core territory of the painting, when a child does a painting or a drawing, the colours they use and the composition of where they put things tells a lot about how they see their home life and their parents and their family and their social life. And if you look at the middle of that painting, it's full of purples and greens, which means they were feeling creative. It means they were feeling safe. They were feeling protected. They felt like their mother was doing a good job protecting them. Above which you can see like an orange blob, which is the sun. And in paintings, the sun for children is the mother. And it's everything on the outside, like the house or the middle of the painting is their home, represents their home and their core self, how they see themselves and how they see the family unit. And the middle of that painting is purples and greens. So they were feeling safe, they were feeling loved, they were feeling protected by mum who was shining over them at the top of the painting. However, the outside, which usually like the trees, represent the father and like the male figures. The outside of the painting was all black and murky greys, which means that they don't have a lot of trust. They didn't have a lot of trust of the men in their life, so they were possibly afraid of their father, or didn't like the relationship between them and their mother and their dad. So the family dynamic from the male perspective, whether it's because the children knew that she had a lot of not very nice men in her life, and it was affecting them because they were distrusting of the men that she had around her at the time, or whether it was they were distrusting of the father, uncles, grandfathers, male teachers, whatever. If you look at that painting, the outside of that painting is masked with darkness. So those children didn't feel threatened by anything in the home, and they felt safe and protected by whom and whatever was in that home, and they knew their mother had their best interests at heart, which is interesting as to why social services were called, because just if they knew their job, if they knew what they were doing, they could have taken one look at that painting and known straight away that the children were happy with their mum and they actually felt safe in that home, whereas it was the outside world they felt threatened by. So that's a really interesting tell. You can always tell by how children react, and it's by what children say and do naturally without being fed any information by the adults around them. These children were too young to be producing poltergeist activity on their own, because poltergeist activity doesn't usually start exhibiting itself until you're around about sort of between the age of 9 and 11 up to the age of about 22, because the puberty process doesn't really stop until you're about 22. That's usually when you've finished growing and your hormones have sorted itself out, and you've found your compass north as to what you want to do in your life, and who you are as a person has already been established in that. So so these children were too young to be producing poltergeist activity. So you have to look at the mum, and this is where Dr. Taff fell down that line of inquiry that I went down as well. And this is no criticism on the mother. This is no judgment on the mother. I think she was put in as a single mum myself, getting ready to embark on a independent life with my boys once, I get justice for my situation, and that I know how stressful it is. I raised my boys on my own. I homeschooled them myself. I did everything myself. It was always just my boys and I. Even when I was married, even living in the same house, it's always just been my boys and I. And I know how hard it is, when you don't have the money to buy them the clothes they need and the shoes they need, and making sure that they eat properly, and, trying to establish yourself financially and independently, and that it's really hard, let alone doing it while you were pregnant. And then, I know what it's like to have marriage breakups, and, like it's daunting. And so I think that everything she experienced was a culmination of her life stresses and the people she had in her life, and the relationships she had growing up, and the relationships she had with men, as well as having to embark on a new life as a single mum, to have a newborn, and, relying on other people to help her with emotional support, and, that sort of thing. I think that she turned all of that stress and fear into what it was she experienced. And the proof in my hypothesis is in the fact that when she moved out of the house, even though she reports to have had a couple of incidences, which I think could have been maybe part of her like ascension psychosis, because clearly she started making better choices in her life, because as she moved away from the home and she started making better choices with her life, eventually the activity ceased. Because, like, if it is a classic haunting, if it is an actual haunting where it's time slips, that's not going to travel with you everywhere you go. Ghosts don't follow you. Real trapped spirits, if it's a real dead person who is trapped in that house, they don't follow you, they ask you for help. And I think that this man that she was seeing was trying to tell her, you need to get out of this house, because it's not healthy for you and it's not good for your children to be around what you're around. I felt a total sense of protection and peace, and what's the word I'm looking for? Honourable from, this, like with Bathsheba. I think this poor man was given a reputation he doesn't deserve, based on the mass hysteria of people who want to believe that ghosts are real and poltergeists can try and kill you. Which brings me to the point of the cameraman who, reportedly got hung in the attic. You have no way of proving that he didn't accidentally walk into that coat hanger, or, like, what, just because you didn't see it the first time doesn't mean it's not there. We have all had incidences where we have, like the Mandela effect, like you believe something that isn't true. Like, you will swear black and blue. I swear to you, I left my glasses beside the bed. I saw them there. I was just looking at them. So why are they in my bag in the car, sort of thing? That's the Mandela effect. It's like false memories. Now, if they were climbing up there already expecting something to happen and the tension was high, and I can tell you now, I know for a fact the tension was high, because of the fact that when they took electronic equipment up into the attic, all the batteries died and then came back to normal once they came back down. So, as I said, energy rises. They went up there already expecting things to happen. And it can give, like when you're stressed, or when you're maybe got things going on within your own life, and that it's easy to overlook things. It's easy, even on camera, you might not see things on camera, and there's something will happen. It's like, but it's not there on camera. But just because the camera doesn't pick it up doesn't mean it's not there, And so I think what happened is that, he was going about doing what he was doing, maybe a little bit scared, maybe a little bit, full of anticipation, fear of the unknown, and he's walked into something he didn't see, and then it's been assumed that someone's tried to kill him. Like, The dead have no interest in hurting the living. When the dead appear to you, it is always in quick, short bursts and requires a lot of energy for them to be able to come through. And when they come through, their message is very short, succinct, and to the point, because of the fact that the dead would rather communicate with us telepathically, in our minds through thoughts and memories and daydreams, or in our sleep, because it requires less energy and it's less frightening for us. They don't want to scare us when they come through, because then you'll immediately shut yourself down and it will be hard for them to communicate. So I do not believe for one second that what they saw was threatening or menacing or malevolent. I think he was there to protect them. He was warning her to get out of the house because she was in an unhealthy situation that he didn't want to have been an effect on the children. And I think he was protecting the children and trying to warn her. And because she was in such a heightened state, she was picking up on his asthma. She was picking up on his breathing problems. And I think with the fear of the unknown matched with a little bit of hysteria, that explains everything that was going on in that home. And then when I found the Dr. Taff kind of brief rundown on what he thought it was, even he said that in his observations he's noticed that people who experience, it's more often than not women that experience these kind of behaviours, who are, the women have come from troubling backgrounds with violent or, upsetting pasts. They've been in painful relationships or had, disruptive childhoods and things like that. So, and I totally agree with him 100%. So that's my rundown of the Jackie Hernandez haunting, or the San Pedro Poltergeist. I will put links in the description box below, including, the critique of my ex-husband's latest artwork, so that you can see what I'm talking about. The cover photo, if you look to the right of the cover photo, you'll see the bit of the child's painting that I'm talking about. So just some food for thought. You don't have to believe anything I'm saying, but it's my job to explain the paranormal and the supernatural to those who are trying to understand it, because learning is knowledge, knowledge is wisdom, wisdom is power. And if I can help you learn to gain the knowledge to receive the wisdom from the truth of the reality of the life that you're living, then you gain power from it. Power to have control over your life, have control over your thoughts and your feelings, and more importantly, have control over your biorhythmic frequency. Because what you take in, what you are around, and what you think matters when it comes to the evolution of your soul. So I'm going to leave you with that. I will speak to you later. Ka kite anō.